But what are the basic beliefs? How does Scientology work? Many of you might have been approached by someone, if you're walking down one of those streets, maybe in Hollywood or someplace else, offering a free personality test. Usually this is the opening idea. A free personality test or a free emotion test, things like this, where you would sit down and you'd answer some questions, and they would start to say, well, you know, there's some interesting things, or you have some good points, you have some bad points, I see some things you need to work on. Ultimately, the concept behind Scientology is that humanity, each one of us, is what they deem a Thetan, a being, a spirit, or a soul. Thetans are real beings. They operate a body, but they're not a body. Okay, a man operates a car, but he's not a car, and Thetans are the real being. The body is just the shell that we operate. Because Thetans are spiritual, they're not part of our physical universe. Scientologists use the acronym MEST, the Matter, Energy, Space, Time universe, the MEST universe. They have no space, but they are immortal because they can't die as spiritual beings. And given that, your mind is actually a pretty amazing thing. Now, it has two different areas in it. Your mind has like a really well-functioning computer, area that can do all the things that you want your mind to do. But there's also an area that holds kind of negative emotions, negative experiences, things that would cause you pain, things that you may not let go of. So if you were in a car accident per se, you might have flashbacks of that car accident, and that may be inhibiting you. Remember I said this is what kind of Hubbard's core is in Dianetics, that he wants to remove these negative feelings, engrams is how they label it. These types of trauma, these hidden images, these are part of the reactive mind, and they could cause physical harm, they could cause mental harm, emotional problems, and these are the things that are holding you back. And so what Dianetics and Scientology are trying to do is remove these mental barriers so that you can be functioning on a better level. We're operating at a substandard level right now, according to Scientology. People are basically good, but it's just the problem of the reactive mind that brings about the cause of like irrational thought, or people who want to be evil or selfish or things like that. So this is what you see. The reactive mind is the bad side, the supercomputer kind of thing is the good side. And these engrams, these memory traces, stick with you. Now, when you enter a Scientology facility and you begin this process, the first thing that you do is start a process of what they call auditing. And they give you a couple of cylindrical metal, almost like cans, that are attached by wires to an E-meter, something that L. Ron Hubbard developed. The E-meter reads tension. It's almost like kind of like a lie detector that could read the moisture or the tension, blood, in your hands. And this E-meter has a little needle, and when they start asking you different questions, tell me about your life, tell me about this, tell me about something that particularly disturbs you, and the meter will read tension levels that you're feeling as you're answering these questions, and the auditor will note these things. He'll say, well, let's talk about this. Let's see if we can bring this out, and if you can voice it and explain it, and then you can get rid of it, right? And in these auditing sessions, you're considered non-clear because you have these engrams still. You haven't cleared yourself of all these negative emotions. And guess what, guys? It works. I mean, to some extent. Now, do you need the E-meter? Probably not. A good psychologist, and this is why the comparison to psychology, a good psychologist can tell you, yeah, if you talk through your problems and have someone else there to help you process them appropriately, yeah, you'll feel better. But with Scientology, the goal is to use the equipment, use the right terminology, but people walk out of it feeling better. If nobody felt better, you'd never sell any books, you'd never have any auditing again. Why go back? But people feel better, and the first costs are normally low. There's no compulsion. or repressions. The goal of a person is to get clear. So you have non-clear people, you have pre-clear, people who are working through their different states. Ultimately, when you have no more of these engrams, you have achieved a state of clear. So that's the first goal, that you would have no psychoses, no nervousness, no ill effects, no psychosomatic illness, no anything. You'd be operating on a much higher level of intelligence than you had before. Your life would be full of vigor. You'd be satisfied with it. And people who, ex-Scientologists will tell you, you go through an auditing session, you feel great. You really do, and you want to go back more. It's almost like a drug. Matter of fact, in the 60s, what would happen is they were selling Scientology as after the drugs, you get the high without the drugs with Scientology. That was the sales pitch there. And so you have to go through this auditing process, and that's the whole point. Because every time you come in for an audit, it costs money. You have to pay for the services. Scientology is the only faith system that charges its adherents to grow in the faith. Now, right there, that should be a huge red flag. Why, if you are an altruist, the reason why, and we're going to talk about this probably later this year, there's a lot of noise going on in the world right now about why should religious organizations get special privileges, this is the phrase that they use, of not paying their taxes like the rest of us. Right? That's the claim. Anybody heard this? Is this familiar at all? Yeah. Why do you think that is? It's because religious organizations don't organize to make money. They organize to help the community. Most churches, most organizations who are nonprofits don't stockpile their cash. They use it for missions. So for example, you have food banks and soup kitchens and clothing ministries and things like this. In order for the federal government to come in and put together their own soup kitchen or clothing drive or things like that would cost significantly more money than the church paying taxes would provide. It is better and cheaper for the church to provide those services and not pay the tax. And this is beyond that, of course, there's the whole concept that churches teach moral values, and church-going people tend to, on the whole, be more moral than non-church-going people. Therefore, it makes sense, right? For example, Christians are still the most generous subgroup in America to non-Christian causes than anybody else. Okay, I'm talking about giving to the Red Cross, or pick your charity. So this is the statistics on it are all over the place. This is why churches are nonprofit, not because they get special privileges, because they perform good services and they provide a moral foundation for the community. But that's the claim. Scientology charges for their services, and they really don't do a whole lot in return for it. You don't see a whole lot of Scientology hospitals being built who are not, who are bringing patients in, like St. Jude, for example. St. Jude never charges a child with cancer or their family to be treated. They do it all because of donations. So families can go there. There's no equivalent in Scientology whatsoever. But they charge for the auditing services. So what Hubbard does is he creates this idea of progress. You have to keep auditing. You're on a path. They call it the bridge, right? You're on your way. Scientologists will ask, where are you at on the bridge? Oh, well, I'm pre-clear. Oh, I'm clear. I'm an operating Thetan. I've started OT level 2 or something like that. There's different ranks, different areas of the bridge. And here's David John Carter, who wrote in 1995, quote, "The fundamental concept behind both Dianetics and Scientology processing is that the mind stores incidents as images in a series of related chains. If previously occurred if the image has previously occurred to that person. If you find the earlier incident, which has been lost to the conscious mind, and get the person to look at it, then this can eliminate the entire problem, the entire chain. If this doesn't work, then there's an earlier incident and so on. The earliest incident is called basic on the chain, and the end phenomenon would be that person is no longer troubled by the incident. So sometimes when you can't get rid of a bad thought even after auditing, there must be one before that and one before that. And this is the point of the bridge. So they get this E-meter, and again, it measures resistance. And they ask you to picture in your mind, by the way, they believe that mental images have mass, and that they will teach you that the E-meter reads the mass of the image that you're thinking of. So as the person looks at the picture, it causes the mass to come closer to the body, and so increases the overall resistance associated with the body. You keep looking at the picture, and eventually the person will see it all at once, which time the mass disperses and discharges when the meter level drops. And when it does that, it can't cause any more unfavorable effects, and you're considered clear of that engram. Now, the tone scale is another scale that Hubbard came up with. That's an emotional scale. Rather than repressed feelings, this ranks people between -40, which is total failure, to 0, which is death, so you can be worse than dead, to +40. And your goal, again, there's other side auditings that you do in order to increase your ranking on the tone scale. And sometimes you'll stop this auditing to do that subsection, or to read this book, and by the way, you have to, if you want to buy new materials, you have to buy the new materials, and all of this stuff. It all costs money. The estimated fee for Scientology services to go all the way through the levels to OT 8 or what have you is somewhere, and this is my stats from 9 years ago, between $365,000 to $380,000 per person. That's a lot of cash. That's a lot of cash. So what happens? So you say, well, I've been paying for these auditing sessions. I really can't pay for it. Well, but we don't want you to stop your auditing. You're feeling so well. You have a mortgage, don't you? You have a house. Maybe you can have a second mortgage on it, or maybe you could put a reverse mortgage on the house that you own, or maybe you can come and work for us and do some auditing of some pre-clears to help pay for your services. And this is how they start to draw you in. And eventually what happens is, first of all, you'll never, unless you're very, very wealthy, you'll never be able to pay for all of the services that you need. And you become an indentured servant at some point in time. Okay, so that's how Scientology works. But what do they believe? Well, let's take the basic concepts first. About God. Scientology document 8008, Hubbard says, quote, "There are gods above all other gods and gods beyond the gods of the universes." Okay, what does that mean? Well, again, Hubbard believes that we are immortal Thetans who were bodiless souls and created a material world. We are like the gods who created this material world as playthings. Thetans have lived eternally in a spiritual state, but the Scientology universe constitutes a subjective mental emanation or projection of the Thetans, having merely an agreed upon and are not an actual reality. So it's like a virtual reality if you think about it. Think of a bunch of people kind of agreeing on building a game, or Minecraft, right? Isn't that the hot thing now, where you start building? All you have are blocks that you start with. You got a landscape, but you can build your own house whatever way you want it, dig your own tunnels and things like. And if you and your friends get together and play, you can visit each other and all. This is so the idea that the material world is constructed through a group agreement of what it should be. It became the entire physical universe is a game, the product of Thetan ingenuity, designed for escaping boredom, which apparently emanates from the original Thetan consensus to create in prehistory. So the original group of guys got together and constructed this thing. What happened was they started to get so immersed in their Anybody with teenagers in a video game console knows what I'm talking about now. You get so immersed in the virtual world that you forget that there's an actual, hey, the lawn still needs mowing. I have 4 boys. Of my 4 boys, none of them were really huge video game guys. We just didn't do a whole. Now my youngest is a hockey player and he likes to play the NHL hockey, but none of them have been really like 6 hours a day kind of guys in the video game world, which I'm glad. But there was when you started doing MUDs and multi-user level games and Dungeons and Dragons. There's guys who like live this stuff. There's people who they're wasting their college tuition because they're 20 hours a day on the computer and never going to their classes and things like. This is what they're kind of pitching, that these original Thetans got so immersed in the game they forgot that they were spirits and they thought that they were living beings. So there is no God who created the universe. The universe was created by the Thetans themselves. What about Jesus? Well, stories and beliefs about Christ are actually implants into pre-clears so that the Thetans would not believe that they were disembodied spirits. Hubbard writes, somebody on this planet about 600 BC found some pieces of R6. R6 is this basic stuff. And he says, I don't know how they found it, either by watching Mad Men, or not the show Mad Men, like crazy people, Mad Men. But since that time, they've used it, and it became what is known as Christianity. So it seems that Hubbard is pretty clearly drawing the line that Christianity is a false belief. He writes in Certainty magazine number 5, quote, neither Lord Buddha nor Jesus Christ were operating Thetans, or OTs, according to the evidence. They were just a shade above clear. Okay, now why he pulls on Jesus on this side and then says that he's a figment on that side, I'm still fuzzy on, but this is what I'm talking about, some of this internally incoherence that we see. So ultimately, though, the Christ of the Bible is fictional. Again, about man, I've said that we're Thetans. We've lived eternally. We're trapped in our belief of a messed universe. We suffer from implants and engrams, as well as body Thetans and their implants and engrams. And I'm going to get to the story of this in just a little while, but just know that there's 3 main problems that we deal with. The engrams are those negative emotions. Implants are ideas and things that we've cultivated, but then there's these body Thetans. And I'll talk a little bit about them when we get into our salvation story in just a minute. Hubbard holds that the eternal indestructible self, which is like the Atman of the Hindu Upanishads, was an early foreshadowing of Scientology, the Scientology concept of the Thetan. So you have this idea of this all-pervading spirit of the universe is kind of the same idea that he's trying to sell in the concept of us being a Thetan. It's a lot like Gnosticism. If you've studied 2nd century Christian heresies and Greek Gnosticism, that's fairly close to it as well. Now, in order to work your way up the scale, up the bridge, there's a point at which, after you're clear, you're an operating Thetan, things are functioning well, then you start getting into operating Thetan levels. And these become more difficult and more intensive. And it really, the pivotal moment in a Scientologist would be to hit OT level 3. Now, there are 8 of them, but OT 3 is the key. Operating Thetan level 3 is the big one because it reveals the creation story and the key problem for people on this earth. L. Ron Hubbard wrote it in his own handwriting. It's kept locked in a briefcase, and it said that for anybody who reads it, who has not gone through the proper auditing channels, it will kill them instantly. It's a big deal. So you have paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to get to this point. The paper is brought before you, and here's what you find out. 75 million years ago, there was a galactic federation of 76 planets that were suffering from a huge overpopulation issue. I mean, there are like 250 billion people in each one of these 76 planets. Now, the world at this point in time was kind of like 1950s Earth, just the same way as we would have experienced it in the 50s. Funny, Dianetics was written in 1950. Scientology came out in the 50s. Interesting that the Earth would be a reflection of the 1950s as opposed to, say, today. But you have this huge overpopulation problem. At that time, the Federation of Planets was ruled by an evil overlord named Xenu. And he decided to get rid of all of these people that were causing this problem in the population issue. So he captured them all, set traps, and flew them in a bunch of rockets that resembled exactly, and these are Hubbard's own words, they looked exactly like our DC-8s, except they had rockets for engines. Now, why a DC-8? Well, the DC-8 was the plane of the day in the 50s. So they flew them to a planet named Tigak, which is actually Earth. It's his name for Earth, in spaceships. And what he did was he deposited the beings around these volcanoes that existed around the Earth at that time. Remember, this is 75 million years ago. Then Hubbard says that Xenus set off hydrogen bombs to kill all these people, clear up the population problem. But remember, people aren't physical, they're Thetans with a physical body. So while the physical body's wiped out, now you have all of these Thetans floating around. So what Xenu did with these was he captured them with electronic ribbons, okay, and forced them to watch movies so that they would believe they would be implanted with these lies. This is where the implants come in. They would be implanted with ideas of false memories, that they'd lived great lives. They would be implanted with beliefs in religion and Jesus and things like that. So these spirits are now called body Thetans. So they have implants, they have engrams of their own that they've captured, and like ones start to clump to like, and they start to seek out, they're still, by the way, around today, and they start to seek out you and me because we're living entities with real bodies, and they come inside and they glom onto us. So you have your own engrams, you have your own implants, but now you have these body Thetans that you have to deal with as well. Now, it just so happened that there were a few Thetans who didn't like this plan, who were loyal to, I'm not sure who they were loyal to, because Xenu was the overlord, but they were loyal to somebody, and they decided to capture Xenu. So they captured him, they escaped the bombing, they captured him, they trapped him in an electronic cage inside some mountain of the earth, and he's still alive to this day. Now, how do you get then saved as a Scientologist? Salvation can only come about by once again discovering your true Thetan through Scientology auditing, through this whole process. And even in the OT levels, you have to, getting clear and removes the engrams, but you still got these implants, you've got these operating, you've got these body Thetans you have to clear yourself of, you've got all this other stuff that still needs work. And you work and you work and you work at it. And what happens then, now, I mean, I know it sounds hilarious. It sounds funny. Why would anybody believe this stuff? And we're going to get to that next. This is kind of the real pivotal point of the class. But what happens is you start to doubt as you go higher and higher, and as the push becomes more and more severe for you to do these things, you start to kind of have questions, right? I mean, you would start to, and what happens is a lot of people start to doubt themselves. They don't doubt Scientology. They start to say, why am I not getting better anymore? I remember at the beginning it used to be so good, but now it's like I can't get rid of this stuff. I keep finding more, and I feel worse. And depression starts to come in, and people start to get desperate for that feeling, much like drugs again. Where's that high that I used to feel? Where is that euphoria that I used to have? And they start to become more and more insular and self-doubting and self-driven to find what they had before, because what's the ultimate motive? Self-worth, self-improvement. We're not again talking about truth. You see, this is why I worry about kids today who think that, I think a recent poll by the Pew Internet found that 65% of all high school kids believe that they will be famous. It's like, well, just by the numbers, you can't do that. You can't have a world where everybody's famous. But everyone's going to find the job that's completely fulfilling to them, and they won't have to work very hard at it, and they'll step right out of college right into this $50,000 a year. This is how our society believes now. This is how young people think the world works. And it scares me, because what they're doing is they're setting themselves up for someone who'll say, I'll help you make your dream come true, without fact checking it. And it scares me. This is what happens with Scientology. Now, if that's not bad enough, the self-delusion, what we do find is Scientology becomes an organization that is built on a house of cards. And because it's built on a house of cards, nobody can handle any cross breezes coming, because the whole house will fall down. So L. Ron Hubbard and also David Miscavige are very, very directly responsible for persecuting anybody who would raise a criticism against Scientology. The evils of Scientology are replete through the internet. But let me give you a couple of ideas. In the California Supreme Court in 1984, there was a lawsuit brought against the church by one of its adherents, who sued the church for mental duress and things of that nature. And this is court documents where the California Supreme Court ruled, quote, the organization, which is Scientology, the organization clearly is schizophrenic and paranoid. And this bizarre combination seems to be a reflection of its founder, L. Ron Hubbard. The evidence portrays a man who has been virtually a pathological liar when it comes to his history, background, and achievements. That's the California Supreme Court ruling on that issue. Former Cult Awareness Network, Cynthia Kisser, was interviewed on 60 Minutes when she was talking about the Church of Scientology. Can used to predominantly focus on Scientology, especially in the early 90s. And she said, quote, Scientology is quite likely the most ruthless, the most classically terrorist, the most litigious, and the most lucrative cult the country has ever seen. And this is why she said that. If you are going through auditing or in Scientology in some way, but you also have an individual that you know of that maybe has some criticisms of Scientology, they will label you a PTS, a potential trouble source. Potential trouble source is defined as a person who's, while active in Scientology or pre-clear, yet he's connected to a person or a group that is a suppressive person or groups. And that's the big thing is a SP, a suppressive person. If you're labeled an SP, that means that you have done something to offend Scientology as the faith. And as a suppressive person, you now have a target on your back. A suppressive person or group is one that actively seeks to suppress, and these are Scientology's definitions, is one that actively seeks to suppress or damage Scientology or a Scientologist by suppressive acts, e.g. those which are calculated to impede or destroy Scientology. Now this can be anything. Jim Barry, I don't know if you remember the old comic strip Barry's World. He used to do a single panel comic. He wrote in one panel, it was a guy, two guys, and one was saying, I forget, try this new meditation or something. And the other guy said, I was into meditation, TM, Vishnu, Scientology, positive now thinking, and now I'm only into money, So that was the joke, right? It was Barry's. But because he had mentioned Scientology in that list, he was labeled a suppressive person by the organization, and they went after them. They started calling his editors. They had different people in the community write letters on any comic strip that he drew to try and say, this is offensive to me. You shouldn't carry this guy. They tried to take away his livelihood by lying about him. This is a concept known as fair game in Scientology. Remember, L. Ron Hubbard's writings in Scientology are scriptures. So this is scripture in Scientology. In his HCO policy letter of October 18th, 1967, L. Ron Hubbard decrees that a person who is suppressive is considered an enemy and may be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist. He may be tricked, sued, or lied to, or destroyed. That's L. Ron Hubbard's dictum on anybody that crosses his path. Fair game has been used and is still used to this day over and over and over again. If you leave Scientology and you love your wife, you're going to have people following your wife. They're going to be, they'll call your work. Hey, they'll pose as a reporter. This is a reporter for the local paper about those pedophile charges of your employee. What do you think about that? I want to get your statement. Or they'll sue you. They'll bring in lawsuits. And they'll file extensions, and they'll file more lawsuits and file more extensions. The point is not to win the suit. The point is to bankrupt you in litigation, so you lose your house, you lose your family, you lose everything. For those people who are either left Scientology or had a family in Scientology and start asking questions, they will be what they call disconnected. And a disconnection is to completely cut off all contact with any suppressive person. So they say, here's an HCO policy letter from 1965. Any PTS who fails to either handle or disconnect from an SP is guilty of a suppressive act and becomes a SP himself. In other words, if a spouse, relative, church, or friend remain antagonistic towards Scientology, the Scientologist must disconnect, which includes divorce, complete separation, complete and utter deviation from that individual, or risk being declared a suppressive person, and they therefore become fair game themselves. Now, the church continues to claim that fair game policy was canceled, but repeatedly this claim has been proven false. Only the public declaration that someone is fair game was stopped, so they don't make it known across the world because of the bad public relations the policy generated. Scientologists understand that a suppressive person need not be declared fair game to be fair game. And Hubbard has done this ever since he got any taste of power. He writes in another letter, quote, "Never treat a war like a skirmish. Treat all skirmishes like wars. Never fear to hurt another in a just cause." That's in his code of conduct, code of honor. It's the creation of human abilities on page 5. Or he says this in the magazine article on Level O check sheet. He says, quote, "The purpose of the suit is to harass and discourage rather than to win. The law can be used very easily to harass and will generally be sufficient to cause the enemy's professional decrease. If possible, of course, ruin him utterly." Now in 1986, former Scientologist Larry Wallersheim won a $30 million jury verdict in California again in compensatory and punitive damages for being targeted as a suppressive person. The California Appeal Court found Scientology's countersuit of Wallersheim was, quote, "consistent with a pattern of conduct by the church to employ every means, regardless of merit, to frustrate or undermine Wallersheim's petition activity. The church's lawsuit was a retaliation for his 1980 lawsuit against the church, and B, to punish him economically for bringing that lawsuit, and C, to obliterate the value of any victory over the church by forcing him to abandon his efforts." That was the California Appellate Court. Recognized that what they were trying to do is simply ruin him. Now, there's one aspect of fair game that I've kind of alluded to called dead agenting. And this is to spread malicious lies and rumors about the anti-Scientologist person or organization in an attempt to so thoroughly discredit them that everyone concerned will be disgusted with them and not listen to the information they have to give about the cult. So Hubbard again writes in a policy letter, "Make enough threat or clamor to cause the enemy to quail. Always find or manufacture enough threat against them to cause them to sue for peace. Don't ever defend, always attack. It is my specific intention that by the use of professional PR tactics, black PR, my opposition will not only be dulled but permanently eradicated." So they don't play with this stuff. They go after everything you have. They don't care. If you're a potential trouble source, you might get reprimanded to Hemet, the Gold Center over here, where you will work for about 40 cents an hour. You'll maybe get 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. 7 days a week. If you're really a problem, they'll send you to the LA facility, 7th floor, where reports are people cleaning the floors with their tongues, getting scraps. If you watch the Going Clear documentary, they go into all of this. People getting scraps of food after everybody else has eaten, treated barbarically. And yet they will turn around and come on camera and say, no, Scientology is the best thing that's ever happened to me. They're so utterly and completely brainwashed, so utterly dependent on finding that euphoric high that they can't doubt it. In 1995 in Clearwater, Florida, Clearwater, by the way, is now the spiritual head of the church. Why the organization still has its corporate headquarters, I believe, in LA. The spiritual headquarters are considered Clearwater, Florida. And Lisa McPherson, 36, was, according to the state police, found dead because of Scientology. The state police recommended that the state attorney, Bernie McCabe, bring criminal charges against the church. The county medical examiner said she died of a blood clot due to dehydration after being denied water for at least her last 5 to 10 days. Imagine being so dehydrated that your blood starts to clot in the veins because there's not enough water to sustain it. Lisa McPherson is a public death that Scientology can't shake. I know that there are more private ones. Either people committing suicide because of all the pressure or worse. The danger, though, isn't merely that somebody's going to walk into a Dianetics center. Scientology has many, many front groups. Some of them sound very, very nice, like Sterling Management Systems, which is a consulting firm to help professional executives be the best executive they can be. But what they do is they draw you into Scientology auditing through that process. The Way to Happiness Foundation, I used to work right next door to one of these facilities. And they go into the schools. They have this 21-point, be kind to others kind of shtick that they pull out. And the Los Angeles Unified School District brings them in. Front group for Scientology. Applied Scholastics, Concerned Businessmen's Association of America, the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, Association for Better Living and Education. All of these are Scientology front groups to get you to start auditing. Here's one that you may have heard of, Narconon. Sound familiar to anybody? Narconon. How to get away. It's kind of like a 12-step program. You heard of Alcoholics Anonymous? Narconon is for supposedly narcotics, but it's a Scientology front group. A chain of health clinics called HealthMed. All of these things are built for one purpose only, and that's to bring people into auditing procedures so that they can get them onto the bridge and help them become Scientologists. Okay, lastly though, what should we learn from all this? First of all, the good news. Scientology is imploding before our eyes right now. Like I said, I gave this talk 9 years ago. Since then, since 2006, the first thing that happened was the internet has been a huge thorn in the side of Scientology because all this secret stuff that they held under copyright for so long is now widely available online. All you need to do is tell freedom fighters, don't publish this, and you'll see it show up about 10 different places. And so all of these documents are readily available online. More and more people are understanding what Scientology is, and they're wary of it. Books and documentaries are proliferating. Obviously, the HBO documentary going. By the way, I've given you guys a resource page on the end of that notes. If you want to dig deeper into what Scientology is, there's a whole bunch of different articles, websites that you can check out, things like that to really get the detail of it. They're all in there. But here's the big things. In this, just since 2005 through now, there have been a huge shakeup at the top levels of Scientology. It seems that David Miscavige has himself become very, very paranoid. And one of the things that he did was he fired all of his top lieutenants. They're all ex-Scientologists and talking out. And they talked on this documentary. Paul Haggis, who I talked about at the beginning, he is 27 years a Scientologist. He's speaking out now against it. What drove him away was California's Prop 8 issue. Scientology wouldn't come out in support of Prop 8, and that was the breaking point for him. OT level 3 bothered him. What? I paid all this money for this. But then he starts doubting himself and saying, well, maybe I just am not ready to receive it yet. See how brainwashing works? But it was the fact that you have, a person in Hollywood who belongs to an organization that doesn't oppose Prop 8. Yeah, that's a big culture shock for him. Mark Rathburn, second in command to David Miscavige, has left the church. Mike Rinderer, former head of the church's Office of Special Affairs, who would go out and do these clandestine things, 35 years as Scientologist, breaks away from the church in 2007. Jason Baggy was an actor. Spanky Taylor, who was the lady who brought John Travolta into Scientology, was his personal handler. She has now been considered a suppressive person and disconnected. The other Scientologists are breaking free. Scientology is not attracting the people it used to. It's really falling by the wayside. However, they're still getting more money than they ever have before, because Miscavige doesn't care about how many people are following. I think Hubbard did. I think Hubbard believed his own hype. I think he was so proud of what he accomplished and what he found, quote unquote, that he believed that everybody needs to be doing this. And he wanted he would make promo films and things like that. Miscavige is not that guy. Miscavige just wants the money. That's at least how he started, the money and power. So while you have less than 50,000 people in Scientology today, they have liquid assets of like $1.5 billion. I mean, huge stockpiles of money that aren't going anywhere but into Miscavige's pocket. Okay, so that's the good news. But realize that nature and your belief system both abhor a vacuum. And this is a key piece. It's not that Scientology is so crazy that no one believes it. It's the fact that people will believe whatever you tell them that they want to believe in order to make themselves feel better. Okay? Everyone needs a worldview. You need to at least explain how you work in relation to the world. Who am I? How do I fit into this world? Where am I going? What's my destiny? Where did I come from? All these big questions we need to have answered. And this was the attraction of Scientology. Jason Baggy, the actor, he had said, quote, "Other religions have their angels and demons. So was a story about an alien spirit from another solar system really all that hard to believe?" And the interviewer said, well, I could see what he was saying, but after spending so much money and time, hundreds of thousands of dollars and several years of dedication to reach OT3, wasn't it a shock for the Scientologists to learn what their religion was really all about? And actually it wasn't. And here's why. Danny Lemberger, who controlled one of the organizations in Israel, said that his years and years of whole track auditing, during which he saw himself many times millions of years ago, so they would, in this auditing, picture previous memories. Picture memories from your past life. How about 50 past lives? How about 100 million past lives, right? In this auditing, he would picture himself millions of years ago leading groups during different lifetimes and on other planets. Over the eons, he said he had lived lifetimes during which he had the tendency to get his head chopped off when his people rebelled. But once you start believing that because you've pictured it yourself, then how hard is it to believe that somebody else had an evil overlord who started killing people? Well, it's not that far a jump, is it? Italian guy Tiziano Lugli said, quote, "At the end of a session, you feel invincible. You've been having planets built and destroyed. After that, you come out into this normal world and you feel the most powerful person around because you've been traveling through space and time." So this is how they set you up for this. This is classic, right? You want that euphoric feeling. You're going to believe that stuff about yourself. So and then they unveil Xenu and Tigiak, and oh yeah, that fits in with everything else. Paul Haggis said, if we just believe something, then we don't have to think for ourselves. And that's the key. That's the problem with Scientology right there. If you base your faith on feelings, you open a door for the enemy. Ultimately, Scientology crumbles because the worldview doesn't work. It leads to depression. It leads to paranoia. It leads to schizophrenia. It leads to self-doubt. It leads to people not being able to process themselves in the real world. It leads to lying and deception because that's the only way it can survive, because it's not true. See, this is the complete opposite of what Christianity does for us. It teaches us to live in the real world. It teaches us that pain is real. It teaches us that life is not going to be sunshine and roses, at least not on this side of heaven. But it also teaches us that there's a solution to that doesn't lie within ourselves, which makes more sense. So I worry about our youth today. I worry about a culture that places so much stock in feeling good that the Oscars become the media event of the year. I worry about something where the new iPhone is more important than who's running for president. These are the difficulties that we face, and it scares me because I don't think Scientology is going to last, but nature and belief systems abhor a vacuum. There will be something in its place, and it will lead down the same path. We need to do what Paul said. We need to preach the word because people will look for those things that will tickle their ears. Those things, and people are selfish. They're lovers of money. They're gluttonous. They want anything but the responsibility of owning up to their own sins. We need to do the hard work of helping them understand the truth so that they don't become victims in these kinds of schemes. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for, again, revealing your truth to us through your word and through your Son, Jesus Christ. It is only through him that we can know these things. And we don't take it merely on faith, Lord. We take it on the fact that he rose from the dead, something that we know happened. We pray now, Father, that you would help us speak truth into the lives of the others that we meet, that we love, that we come in contact with, so that you may be known, so that the only true salvation from our pains and from our fears can be found in you, and we can spread that to others who so desperately need it. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.